The Xyrothian fleet arrived in Earth's orbit like a storm of metal, their warships cutting through the void with an aura of supremacy. For centuries, they had been the undisputed rulers of the galaxy's most hostile environments, feared by every species that had ever crossed their path. The title Deathworlders had been theirs alone, a crown forged in blood and fire. No planet in the galaxy could rival the brutality of their homeworld, where the atmosphere itself seemed to conspire against life. Yet, as their ships cast shadows over Earth, their pride was tempered with confusion and fear. Commander Zorak stood at the helm of the lead cruiser, staring out at the planet below, his sharp, multifaceted eyes narrowing. He was a veteran of countless battles, his scarred face a testament to the many wars he had survived. His species had thrived on a world where every creature was a weapon, every storm a death sentence. The Xyrothians were a race forged in adversity, and they had built an empire from the ashes of every species they had conquered. Yet Earth, this so-called death world, was a mystery. The galaxy had long believed that humanity was on the brink of extinction. Their planet, ravaged by wars, pollution, and constant natural catastrophes, had been considered a breeding ground for weakness, the perfect example of a species doomed to fail. But reports from the fringe of the galaxy told a different story. Humanity was still here, still surviving, and worse yet, thriving. The galaxy's most formidable military commanders had begun whispering of a new threat, a species that had endured where even the Xyrothians would have perished. "Commander, we are in position," said Norik, his second-in-command, his voice cold and steady. "Scanners indicate no significant military presence. No fleet, no defenses. Are we sure about this?" Zorak's eyes remained fixed on Earth, the blue and green orb beneath him, as though staring into the heart of an enigma. "We're sure. The reports are clear. There are humans here, alive, and far more dangerous than we anticipated. We will find out why." His voice was a low growl, a warning to the others on the bridge. The pride of the Xyrothians was a fragile thing, and Zorak was about to test it. He turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to the council." A moment later, the voice of the High Council echoed across the bridge. "Zorak, commander of the Xyrothian fleet. Report your status. Have you located the humans?" Zorak's lips curled into a grim smile, his claws tapping against the armrest of his command chair. "We have. The humans are here alive and seemingly unfazed by the conditions we've heard about. But what I have learned thus far suggests they are nothing like the species we were led to believe. Prepare for an unexpected confrontation." The council's voice was stern, but there was a hint of doubt now. "Proceed with caution. We will not risk a full invasion unless we are certain. If they are truly a threat—" "They are more than a threat," Zorak interrupted, cutting off the council's words. "I can already sense their resilience. The battle won't be easy. These humans are not like the weak races we've conquered before. Something is different here." The connection ended abruptly, and Zorak turned back to the view of Earth. The planet was beautiful in its fragility. Lush forests, towering mountains, vast oceans. The surface seemed peaceful, but Zorak knew better. Beneath this calm exterior was a world that had survived apocalypses, endured wars that could have wiped out lesser species, and still managed to stand firm. It was a world of paradoxes, a place where life and death danced in an eternal struggle. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their survival. It was their ability to adapt, to evolve, to push forward when every other species would have collapsed. "Prepare the troops," Zorak ordered. "We're landing." The transport ships descended through the atmosphere, and the moment they touched down, the Xyrothians were greeted not with the shattered remnants of a dying civilization, but with something far more unsettling. Humans, alive, organized, and more prepared than the Xyrothians had ever imagined. They were waiting. Zorak stepped out of the transport ship, his boots crunching against the soil of Earth. The air smelled strange, cleaner than he had anticipated, even with the pollution that choked the cities. And there, standing before him, was a human officer in full battle gear, a woman whose expression held no fear, only quiet determination. "Welcome to Earth," she said, her voice steady. "We were expecting you." Zorak's eyes narrowed. This was not the greeting he had anticipated. It was far too calm, far too confident. The humans had been waiting for them, and that could only mean one thing. They knew what the Zerothians were capable of, and they weren't afraid. The galaxy's only Deathworlders, at least that's what they had believed, had just met their match. And the universe would never be the same again. The ground beneath Zorak's boots trembled as he stepped forward, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His fleet had descended on Earth's surface with military precision, yet the humans, these supposed weaklings, stood unfazed. A chill ran down his spine. He had expected fear. Instead, he found defiance. In front of him, a human officer, clad in sleek, battle-worn armor, stepped forward. She wasn't tall nor imposing by Zerothian standards, but her stance exuded an unshakable confidence. Her eyes met his, no hint of submission, no sign of terror. Zorak's claws twitched at his sides. This was no ordinary species. "Commander Zorak, I presume," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Welcome to Earth." Zorak's sharp, multifaceted eyes studied her intently, then scanned the surroundings. A mix of military-grade equipment and civilian architecture surrounded them, a far cry from the primitive chaos he had been led to believe. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving, and worse, they were organized, focused. Everything about this encounter was wrong. "You were expecting us?" Zorak growled, his voice low, the undertone of incredulity evident. "Why? Do you truly believe you can stand against the might of the Zerothian Empire?" The woman smiled, a brief, almost amused gesture. "We've been preparing for this day longer than you think. We don't just survive, Commander, we fight. And we win." Zorak was silent for a moment, processing her words. Humanity had somehow known of his fleet's arrival, and worse, they weren't intimidated by it. It was a concept the Zerothians struggled to understand. For millennia, no one had dared challenge their superiority in such a way. Yet here they were, standing on the precipice of an entirely new war. He couldn't deny it. Something about these humans unsettled him. "Take me to your leader," Zorak finally ordered, his voice terse. He needed to understand what was happening here, to meet the one who led these resilient creatures. The woman nodded. "Follow me." Without hesitation, she turned and led him toward a nearby transport vehicle. Zorak's soldiers followed in formation, their advanced armor clicking as they moved. As they traversed the human city, Zorak couldn't help but notice the odd mix of old and new, crumbling buildings that seemed to tell stories of past struggles, juxtaposed with towering skyscrapers of glass and steel. The air smelled cleaner than he expected, the streets crowded with humans of all ages, walking with purpose, completely unfazed by the arrival of the Zerothian force. It was clear that humanity wasn't just surviving, they were actively rebuilding their world, and doing so at an alarming pace. "We rebuilt this world, Commander," the officer said, her eyes ahead, her voice barely audible over the hum of engines. "We've fought off invaders, natural disasters, and the scars we've left on our own planet. You're just one more challenge we'll overcome." Zorak's mind raced. This planet, this species, wasn't like anything he had encountered before. The rumors had only scratched the surface. How could a race with so many setbacks, so many disasters have endured? How had they evolved to become such formidable adversaries? He needed answers. But the answers weren't coming easily. The transport arrived at a heavily fortified building. The human officer led him inside, past armed guards who barely flinched at his approach, and into a large chamber. In the center stood a human general, a man whose presence commanded respect. His graying hair and weathered face told the story of someone who had seen battles and survived them, much like the Zerothians. The general stepped forward, extending a hand, not in submission, but in greeting. "Welcome to Earth, Commander. I hope your journey was comfortable." Zorak hesitated for a moment before accepting the handshake, his clawed hand wrapping around the human's. The touch was firm, resolute. "I'll get straight to the point," Zorak said, his voice cold. "You've survived when all the galaxy thought you would perish." "How?" The human general smiled, his eyes glinting with a mix of pride and something more dangerous. Survival isn't just about living, Commander. It's about never giving up. And the moment you underestimated us was the moment you lost. Zorak's mind churned. These humans were more than they seemed. And this meeting, this encounter, was only the beginning. He could feel it now, a shift in the air. Earth was no longer a world to conquer. It was a world that would make him and his fleet fight for every inch they took. And Zorak had no idea if they were ready for what came next. The first shot was fired by the Xyrothians, as expected. Zorak had given the order. His warriors, confident and eager to demonstrate their power, launched a barrage of energy blasts from their assault ships aimed at the human base below. The humans, by all accounts, should have crumbled under the onslaught. Instead, they didn't flinch. Zorak watched through the viewport of his command ship as the human defenses came to life. Turrets emerged from the ground, and missile launchers hummed to life. But what shocked him was the precision with which they responded. The missiles rocketed upwards with deadly accuracy, striking Xyrothian warships mid-air, forcing them to make evasive maneuvers. The humans didn't just react, they countered. Zorak's claws tightened around the armrest. He had expected resistance, but nothing like this. These humans, whose world had supposedly been dying, were now demonstrating tactics that even seasoned Xyrothian generals would have envied. He had underestimated them. "Commander, their artillery is more advanced than we anticipated," Norik said, his voice laced with concern as he scanned the battle on the holographic display. "We're losing drones at an alarming rate." Zorak growled, his eyes narrowing. "Engage at full force. Push through their defenses." The battle raged for hours. The Xyrothians unleashed their full arsenal, plasma cannons, energy shields, and their elite ground troops. But with every offensive, the humans adapted. It was as if they were playing a game of chess, each move calculated with terrifying efficiency. They weren't just defending their planet, they were defending it with everything they had, and they knew exactly how to exploit every weakness in Zorak's fleet. The Xyrothians launched a full-scale assault on the human base's perimeter, sending squads of elite warriors into the heart of the city. Zorak's forces were ruthless, their weapons designed to obliterate anything in their path. But, again, the humans surprised them. Instead of retreating, they fought back with a ferocity that caught the Xyrothians off guard. The Special Forces units, composed of humans who had trained for every possible scenario, moved like a well-oiled machine. They knew exactly how to exploit the Xyrothians' weaknesses, using guerrilla tactics to disrupt the alien forces. Zorak watched as his elite warriors struggled to adapt. It was unlike anything he had seen before. Humans were everywhere, picking off soldiers from the shadows, ambushing convoys, and using their environment to their advantage. The Xyrothians were supposed to be the masters of brutal warfare, but the humans were playing a different game entirely. A game they seemed to have mastered. "We're losing ground," Norik shouted from across the command deck, his voice barely audible over the chaos of the battlefield. "Their counterattacks are overwhelming us." Zorak's claws dug into the metal of his seat. He had expected a fight, but this was a different kind of war. The humans were not just defending, they were fighting for something. Zorak couldn't understand it. What drove these creatures to such extremes? It didn't take long for the answer to become clear. A new threat appeared on the horizon, massive human warships, sleek and deadly, emerging from the clouds like ghosts. They were unlike anything Zorak had encountered before. These ships didn't just have advanced technology, they had a brutality to them, an elegance in their violence that made the Xyrothians look like amateurs. The Xyrothians were forced to retreat, scrambling to reorganize as the human fleet closed in. Zorak realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't just a skirmish. This was a turning point. The humans had more than just resilience. They had ingenuity, and that made them a far more dangerous adversary than any of the Xyrothians had ever anticipated. Zorak's pride had led him to believe that Earth would fall under the weight of his superior forces. But now, as his ships limped away from the battlefield, he knew that this fight was far from over. And the humans had just begun. "We need reinforcements," Norik said, his voice tinged with frustration. Zorik stood, his gaze fixed on the holographic battlefield. No, we're not retreating. Not yet. We'll regroup and strike again. This time, we'll learn from our mistakes. As Zorik turned away, he felt a growing sense of unease. The humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting for something far more dangerous. Their home, their world, their future. And in that, they were not just formidable enemies. They were a force to be reckoned with. The war for Earth had just begun. Zorik had never felt a weight like this. The hum of his warship felt distant, the sounds of his crew barely registering, as his mind swirled with the chaos of the past hours. He had just witnessed the true nature of humanity, and it unsettled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving, even in the face of an invasion. As Zorik stood in the command center, staring out at the distant stars, Norik stepped up beside him, his voice filled with concern. "Commander, we've suffered significant losses. Our fleet is in disarray. We need to reassess our strategy before we lose any more ground." Zorik growled, turning away from the viewport. "We've underestimated them, Norik. I thought we were the apex predators of the galaxy, but these humans, these creatures, are something else entirely." "We know their military is formidable," Norik replied, "but there must be more. What is it about these humans that makes them so relentless?" Zorik had no immediate answer, only the burning sensation in his gut that told him the humans were something far greater than their weapons. "Take us to Earth. We need answers." The Zyrothian fleet adjusted course, the engines groaning as they shifted through space. Zorik's thoughts raced. Every encounter with the humans had been a lesson, each more baffling than the last. They fought with an intensity he had not expected. But it wasn't their technology or even their strength that troubled him. It was their adaptability. They were quick learners, able to read their enemies and adjust tactics in real time. The trip back to Earth was silent, each moment dragging like a heavy fog pressing on Zorik's mind. He needed to understand why these humans fought as they did. He needed to understand how they had survived everything the galaxy had thrown at them. The fleet arrived in Earth's orbit once again, and this time, the atmosphere felt different. The humans had prepared for their return, their warships now dotting the skies, their military positions fortified. There was no sign of fear, no retreat, only defiance. Zorik met with the human general, the one who had spoken so confidently during their initial encounter. The general, who introduced himself as Richard Hale, led Zorik through a series of chambers in their command center. The walls were covered with maps, data screens, and human intelligence reports, all organized with an efficiency Zorik had never seen. As they walked, Hale spoke. "You came here expecting us to be a dying species, Commander. You came to finish us off. But what you don't understand is that we've been fighting for our survival for centuries. Earth is a death world, and we've adapted to it. We've learned to thrive in ways other species simply cannot." Zorik's pace slowed. "You fought to survive, yes. But why do you continue to fight? What drives you?" Hale turned to him, his expression unyielding. "Because we've always fought. It's in our blood, Commander. Our ancestors fought the wild, fought famine, fought other species, fought ourselves. We don't give up. Not ever. Our greatest strength isn't our weapons, or our cities, or our armies. It's the will to survive. The will to adapt." Zorik felt the weight of those words settle on his chest. The human general wasn't boasting. He was simply stating a fact. It wasn't just Earth's physical challenges that made humans resilient. It was their unwavering determination, their refusal to be defeated, that made them a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. "We've survived because we learned," Hale continued. "We learned from every mistake, from every loss. We're a species of survivors, and we don't stop until we've learned what we need to. That's how we won our wars. That's how we rebuilt after our own destruction. And that's how we're winning this one." Zorik's mind churned with the implications of what Hale had said. These humans had survived not because of overwhelming force, but because they had never stopped learning. Every failure, every setback, had only made them stronger. And now, they were putting that strength to use against the Xyrothians. "We are not like the other races you've conquered," Hale said, his voice low but unwavering. "We're something different. And if you think we'll bend to your will, you're gravely mistaken." Zorak stood still for a moment, absorbing the gravity of the situation. The humans were not only fighting for Earth. They were fighting for their way of life. And in that fight, they would do whatever it took to win. He felt a strange respect building within him, a respect for their resilience, their adaptability. But it was quickly replaced by a growing realization. The battle for Earth had only just begun. And if Zorak underestimated these humans again, it would be his last mistake. As Hale left the room, Zorak's thoughts turned dark. He had come to conquer. But now, he wasn't so sure that victory was possible. Zorak's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair, the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. The battle had shifted, and he was starting to see the true cost of his arrogance. The humans were no longer the underdogs, no longer weak. They were evolving, adapting, and his empire was losing ground. "Commander, the situation is worsening," Norek's voice cut through the tense silence. His eyes flicked across the holographic map, a steady stream of losses flashing in real time. "Their tactics, they're changing. Their fleets, their ground forces, everything we've thrown at them, they've countered. They're learning faster than we can react." Zorak's lips curled into a bitter snarl. "Enough of your cowardice. We'll push through, we'll break them. Send in the reinforcements." But deep down, Zorak knew this wasn't just a matter of throwing more firepower at the problem. These humans weren't like the species they'd conquered before. They didn't fold under pressure. They didn't run. They adapted, and they fought smarter. "You don't understand," Zorak muttered under his breath, pacing. "They are different." There was a strange unease in his chest. The realization that humanity's strength wasn't just in their technology or weaponry, but in their sheer ability to endure, was starting to gnaw at him. And worse, they had something the Xyrothians lacked: unity. The silence on the bridge was suffocating. For the first time in Zorak's career, he could not see the way forward. The humans were not the easy conquest he had expected. They were a force that had learned, endured, and prevailed against their own kind for centuries. They were not afraid of death. In fact, it seemed they embraced it. The command room was still, the only sound the faint hum of the warship's engines as it glided through the void. Zorak finally spoke, his voice low, reluctant. "We need to go back to Xyrothian space. I need to speak with the Council." Norek's head snapped up, his brow furrowing. "You're abandoning the mission, Commander?" Zorak locked eyes with his second-in-command. "I'm not abandoning anything. The Council has to know the truth. We've been blind. I've been blind." Zorak turned to face the communications officer, his jaw clenched. "Open a direct line to the Council. Now." The moment the connection was made, Zorak could feel the weight of their gaze through the holographic projection. The High Council of Xyroth had always been a powerful entity, their collective wisdom unrivaled. But now, Zorak felt the weight of their judgment hanging over him. "Zorak, commander of the Xyrothian fleet," the lead counselor's voice boomed from the speakers. "Report your progress. Have you crushed these humans yet?" Zorak's heart pounded, the words on his tongue heavy. "No. We've underestimated them. These humans are unlike anything we've ever faced. They adapt faster than we can respond. And their resolve is unlike anything I've ever seen." The council members exchanged glances, a murmur rippling through their ranks. "What are you suggesting?" the lead counselor demanded, his voice tinged with irritation. Zorak stood straighter, forcing himself to speak with authority. "We need more than just brute force. The Xyrothian Empire cannot defeat these humans by simply overwhelming them. I've seen their strength firsthand. They fight not just for survival, they fight because they can. They've survived the worst their own world could throw at them and emerged stronger. We need to rethink everything we've been taught about them." A tense silence followed. The council was not accustomed to questioning their methods. Zorak could hear the murmurs of disagreement. But it was too late for denial. The humans had shown him something that could not be ignored. They were not the dying, helpless species the galaxy had believed them to be. They were far more dangerous. "You are suggesting we retreat, Commander?" another counselor asked sharply, her tone cold and calculating. "No," Zorak answered, his voice steady now. "But we must approach this differently. These humans, they have something we've never seen before. They do not surrender. They do not break." The council fell silent again, the weight of Zorak's words sinking in. He could feel the shifting tides of their thinking, the realization that the Xyrothians might not be the apex predators of the galaxy anymore. The lead counselor's voice broke the silence. "We'll consider your report. Prepare for the next phase. But do not fail us, Zorak. Failure is not an option." As the communication ended, Zorak turned to face Norik, his mind whirling. The humans had already changed the game, but he knew something now that they didn't. The Xyrothian Empire was not invincible, and humanity was a force that would not be easily crushed. Zorak clenched his fists. It wasn't over yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He had to find a way to adapt as well. The Xyrothians had been the galaxy's predators for eons, but the hunt was no longer one-sided. The stars outside the command bridge blinked with cold indifference as Zorak stared at the massive fleet arrayed before him. The Xyrothian warships loomed like predators preparing for a hunt, but this time it wasn't the humans who were in the crosshairs. It was Zorak and his empire. And for the first time, the Xyrothians were on the defensive. "All ships are in position," Norik reported, his voice tight with tension. "The human fleet is closing in." Zorak's eyes never left the display as it flickered with the image of the human ships, sleek, powerful, and far more advanced than any Xyrothian had anticipated. These weren't just soldiers defending their planet anymore. The humans had become a galaxy-spanning threat, and they weren't going to retreat. For a moment, Zorak felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The underestimation, the overconfidence, the belief that Xyrothian power could overcome anything. It had all been shattered. Now, they were facing an enemy that fought with relentless precision, an enemy that had not only survived but thrived through every trial. "Commander," Norik's voice broke through his thoughts, "the human general, Hale, has issued a warning. Surrender now, or face total annihilation." Zorak's lips curled into a thin smile. "Let them come. We'll show them the true meaning of power." He watched as the human fleet advanced, their warships glowing with intensity. Zorak had fought countless battles, but there was something different about this one. These humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to prove something. And they had already proven more than Zorak had thought possible. "Prepare for engagement," Zorak ordered. "We will crush them or die trying." The Xyrothian fleet surged forward, weapons primed. The battle began in a blur of explosions and tactical maneuvers, the sound of crackling energy and cascading blasts filling the air. Xyrothian warships opened fire, their plasma cannons lighting up the void, while human ships dodged and countered with pinpoint accuracy. For the first time, Zorak felt something close to fear. The humans were relentless. Every move, every attack, seemed to have been calculated with deadly precision. Their ships were fast, their weapons cutting through Xyrothian armor like it was paper. Zorak had expected a victory, but what he faced now was a nightmare. Norik's voice shook with urgency. "Commander, their tactics. It's like they're anticipating every move we make. We can't keep up." Zorak slammed his fist into the armrest. "Push forward. We cannot retreat now." But the more they pressed, the more they realized they were losing ground. The human fleet was everywhere, cutting through their lines, attacking their weakest points with terrifying efficiency. It was clear now, the humans had evolved their tactics to an art form. Zorak's pride, his belief that the Xyrothians were invincible, was unraveling before him. A sudden warning blared throughout the ship, and Zorak's eyes snapped to the screen. A human warship, one of their largest, had broken through the Xyrothian defenses and was headed straight for Zorak's flagship. "Brace for impact," Norik shouted. The Xyrothian ship shook as the human warship collided with them, the resulting explosion reverberating through the hull. Zorak was thrown to the ground, his vision blurring. The damage was catastrophic. The bridge lights flickered, and sparks flew from the control panels. Zorak, disoriented but alive, pulled himself up and glared at the chaotic scene. The human ship had done what Zorak's fleet had failed to do. They had found the weak spot and exploited it. The Xyrothians were no longer the hunters, they were the hunted. "Commander, we need to retreat," Norik urged, his voice laced with desperation. Zorak's mind raced, but his pride wouldn't let him acknowledge defeat. "No, we fight. We fight to the last." The human general, Hale, appeared on the command screen, his expression unyielding. "This is your final warning, Commander Zorak. Surrender or face total annihilation." Zorak's heart pounded in his chest. For the first time in his life, he faced an enemy that he could not defeat, a species that had turned his greatest strength into a liability. He stood in silence, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. The battle had already cost them more than he had ever expected. His soldiers, his fleet, they were broken. And the humans were not stopping. Zorak stared at Hale's calm, steady face. The truth was undeniable. The Xyrothians had miscalculated. These humans were not just survivors, they were the future of this galaxy. For the first time, Zorak understood the true meaning of the word adapt. And in that moment, he knew, if the Xyrothians wanted to survive, they would need to do the same. "We surrender," Zorak finally said, his voice hollow. Hale's expression softened, just slightly, as the human fleet lowered their weapons. The battle was over, and the humans had won. Zorak stood there, facing the truth. The galaxy had changed, and for the first time, the Xyrothians were no longer the apex predators. The humans had become the hunters.